Welcome to today's episode of Unthinkable, a podcast about the aftermath of incidents causing catastrophic injury or death, the experts who are called to serve when these accidents occur, and lessons that we can all learn and implement in our own personal lives. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, KyleBachus.com. Now here's the host of the Unthinkable podcast, Kyle Bachus.
Hey, it's Kyle Bachus. Thank you guys for joining us again today for the Unthinkable podcast. Just as a recap, this podcast goes behind the scenes and talks with the people who investigate catastrophic injury and wrongful death cases, the top experts in the country, and all of the people who are part of the group that comes in after a catastrophic injury or wrongful death. And today we have just a tremendous guest. Super excited to have Scott Turner with us today. Scott is the founder of Truck Accident and Incident Experts, LLC. He is a nationally known, recognized expert in the field of the truck industry and investigating truck accidents. And man, it's a pleasure to have him with us today. So thank you, Scott, for taking a little time out of your day to be here with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, Scott, one of the things I like to do at the start of our podcast is delve into a little bit about why and how you ended up doing what you do for your job. I think people are very interested in learning, man, how does somebody even get involved? How do you become an expert in truck accident and incidents? And so can you just tell us a little bit about the winding road that led to where you are today?
It's a pretty long sordid history how I got here, but I kind of later on when I opened this practice up 16 years ago, I kind of at that point realized that almost everything in my adult life pointed towards this. So that was the interesting part. When I, many years ago, in another life, I started out as a truck driver, 18-wheelers operating commercial motor vehicles around the United States on the road for 5, 6, 7 days at a clip. And then I did that for a while. My son was born, and I didn't want to be on the road, so I started getting into crash work, responding to. It's a long story behind that too, but I ultimately wound up getting into crash work. So I would respond to crashes of commercial motor vehicles, which is trucks, tractor trailers and such. And in total, I responded to well in excess of 1,000 commercial motor vehicle crashes, so real time. So why the truck is still down in the weeds or rolled over or whatever the case may be, I responded to over 1,000 of those in my career. And out of that, about 200 of them were tanker incidents or crashes. So gasoline tankers, things of that nature. So I wound up becoming an instructor with the New Jersey State Police in dealing with these commercial motor vehicle type situations. I did that adjunctly for about 11 years. And then it was, as I said, it was back about 16 years ago, I had decided that I had an opportunity, that it was truly a blessing opportunity for me to get involved in because I really enjoy it. I love doing what I do. And I had an opportunity to get involved where I had an attorney call me out of the blue. And he said that his paralegal had spent some time trying to find like the perfect expert for a cargo tank truck crash, and that a young lady was killed in. So he calls me up and he asked me, he said, would you be interested? So one thing led to another. There I am testifying deposition 6 months later and writing reports and so forth. And in that same exact week, I got called by another attorney, which is it's not by chance. Let me just put it that way. I believe in fate. So it was not by chance. I got called by another attorney. I never marketed myself as an expert witness because I barely even knew what one was back then. So lo and behold, here I am 16 years later, and I've got a crew of experts that work for me. So they work alongside me on cases and crashes. I'm on every single case, and one of my colleagues is on the case with me. So it's a collaborative effort now where we work together. We're all trained to the same level. So if somebody is, for example, operating. If you're driving down Interstate 70 or 80, any one of the interstates, and you see a state trooper, whatever state you're in, and he has a truck pulled over, and he's inspecting that truck. He's underneath the truck with a creeper or at a weight station. I'm trained to that same level, that federal level, which is the first qualification that my colleagues have to have before they can come on board with me to work with my practice. And there's a total of 6 of us all together.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. So just stepping back for a moment. So you decided you're going to be a truck driver, an over-the-road truck driver. What was it that drew you to doing that for work?
Well, I mean, I was a young guy, and trying to find my way in life and where I was going to belong and what I was supposed to do. And so I thought it was pretty neat. I wanted to drive an 18-wheeler and kind of see the country to a certain extent. And so I went out and I got my commercial license, and I bought a tractor trailer, and eventually it was operating commercial motor vehicles. But then in another life, I wound up owning a small fleet. I think it was about 40 some odd, roughly 40 some odd commercial motor vehicles that I owned, and had, drivers working for me. So I've seen it from a management perspective. I've seen it from a driver perspective. I've seen it from a crash perspective, and plus a regulatory perspective. When I say regulatory, I'm referring to this book of regulations here, big thick book, which is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations that we use in determining violations of a commercial motor vehicle, mechanically speaking, or violations of a driver in terms of paperwork, his hours of service, medical violations, medical card violations, and all these different things. They all fall within that regulatory guidance.
And so you said that you then got, after being a truck driver, you got actually involved in responding to truck crashes or truck incidents. And I think in my mind, I'm like, well, so do you have to be a cop to do that? Or how do you end up being in a position where you're responding to truck accidents?
Well, I started a company, and I've always been kind of prolific entrepreneur. I started a company, and the focus was to respond to disasters and truck crashes. So we handled everything. The mainstay of our work was, on a regular basis, was dealing with tractor trailer crashes. Ultimately, in the number of offices that we built over the years, and that was over a period of 18 years, I believe it was. So we built a number of offices throughout the United States. And so we would respond to these truck crashes. And I just saw a niche for that, because there was always a blank spot in a response. So you get the public sector comes out, and now you have the private sector, which is really ill-informed, and they don't know what they're doing, typically speaking, at least back then. And I thought there was a niche to be able to achieve a good safety, because the safety profile is very, very important. You've got to consider, especially when you're standing on top of 9,000-gallon gasoline tanker that's rolled over on a highway. And yes, you drill holes into it to transfer the gasoline out from one tanker to another. Sounds crazy, but that's what we used to do. So after a while, it was just a natural. We just built a company on crash response. Like I said, me personally, I've been on over 1,000 truck crashes in it. Probably, I guess, in total about a 20-year career.
So would you be doing this for the truck companies themselves, or their insurance companies, or some combination of that would list those services?
A combination thereof. And like, for example, in some states, we were actually the county hazmat team. We were a contracted county hazmat team, or the county, so we would respond to everything, all truck crashes, all incidents involving, potential hazmat, hazardous materials. So we would ultimately have a number of type events that we respond to. So, for example, we handled a number of jet crashes as well, train derailments, chemical plant fires and explosions down in Houston. So a whole array of different type incidents we handle. But the mainstay, everyday type incident was a truck running off into the weeds on an interstate someplace, or jackknife or rollover or something to that effect.
And then you said you spent some time being an educator for highway patrol. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it was with the New Jersey State Police. I was an instructor with the New Jersey State Police for I believe it was about 11 years, and I trained responders on how to respond to these type events. And because there's a whole lot you have to know, especially especially when you get into the tank truck world. And that's really where I was arguably known as like the foremost expert on cargo tank truck back years ago. I guess supposedly I am still to a certain extent, but not from being out in the field, but more or less now being in the legal scenarios. So it's just, just all grew out from there.
Well, it's interesting, just as a citizen driving down the highway and you look at the comparative size between a tractor trailer and a car, and it's pretty scary. And I think that professionally doing what I do for a living and representing families, now I understand, like, I think the average car weighs about 4,000 pounds, and a fully loaded tractor trailer can be up to 80,000 pounds or something like that. And boy, there's a big difference between those two sizes, isn't there?
It's substantial, and crash happens. A pernicious crash happens, and the consequence can be substantial. Or I've seen. I work both sides of the coin. So I work both on defense and I work on plaintiff. We work on plaintiff and defense. So, but we only take a case on if we feel as though the case has merit, whether it's from a defense perspective or a plaintiff perspective. So we look at the file and we decide whether we want to be on that case, and so we go forward from there.
But just that weight differential. So that's like one tractor trailer is the equivalent of about the weight of, I'm not good with math, I'm a political science major, but think about 20
Yes, 20.
cars is the equivalent. And so regardless of who is at fault, ultimately, when you have a crash between a private passenger vehicle weighing 4,000 pounds and an 80,000 pound tractor trailer, car's probably not going to do so well, right? Probably not going to do so well in that fight.
Well, yeah, it depends on where in the crash you're involved with. But if it's if you've got and we deal with, there was just one down, and there was just really bad one. I was interviewed by the news channel down in Austin, Texas. I want to say it was last week, and a driver was intoxicated driving a commercial motor vehicle, and he ran into a queue of vehicles that were basically stopped in traffic, and he just as he's going through, he's taking cars out left and right, plus tractor trailers. So I mean, something like that, that's more. It's not real common. I mean, running into vehicles in queue is relatively common with the alcohol side of it. It's not really all that common. We've had it. I've had it happen out in Hawaii. So we work all over all 50 states. We have cases in Alaska currently as well. So but the commercial motor vehicle that runs into the back of a queue of cars waiting in traffic, it's usually pretty disastrous. And I've responded to many of those over the years.
So one of the things that, at least from my understanding, one of the things that the government has tried to do, because of the disparity and in weight, and you have a bigger obligation. You got to be trained to have a commercial driver's license, and you looked at that. You pulled up that book a moment ago, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. Can you tell us, just give us some base understanding as to the difference between being a private passenger vehicle operator and the obligations of being a commercial truck driver if you're going to drive out on the roads with all these families in a vehicle that's 20 times the size?
Yeah, well, the first thing is it can get a little bit confusing when you start talking about intrastate and interstate and all these other things, but just look at it purely from an interstate perspective. You've got a family that's crossing over from from one state to another, crossing a state line. That doesn't affect them either way in any way, shape, or form. All you have to have is a vehicle registration and a driver's license. In the case of a commercial motor vehicle, it's very, very different in that a commercial motor vehicle driver is going to have first off a CDL, which commercial driver's license, or CDL-A for an 18-wheeler. And then if you look at the commercial motor vehicle that has 80,000 pounds, it's got to be in commerce, and that's the key word, in commerce. So if you have a person that's driving his SUV and his family in an SUV, they're not in commerce, so it's not affecting them. But in commerce means that you're transporting what we refer to as articles of cargo, in a commercial motor vehicle. So you're in commerce at that point. You're being paid for it, compensated. So it's compensation, and those are the things that start to build the blocks for us to look and say, this is a motor carrier by definition. But then they have the DOT number on the side of the door, and that kind of tells us who they are and what they're all about. We can run a safety profile on them and make certain determinations.
But when you're driving that vehicle and you get that commercial driver's license, that's not the end of it, is it? There's a whole bunch of, when you pulled out that book, there's rules and regulations, that are there to try to make sure that if you're going to be driving a vehicle that's 20 times the size of the vehicles around you, that you're going to be doing it safe, right?
Yeah, well, not to get wonky on you, Kyle, but there's a part in there that's got 390.3 paragraph E2. And what that says essentially is that a professional commercial motor vehicle driver must be so instructed in the federal motor carrier safety regulations. So, and the way that usually comes about is you'll have, happen to have this right here. So you have the commercial driver's license manual. So the CDL manual, the driver's got to study this to get his CDL, and then it's got to go through tests and driving tests and so forth. And that manual right there, if you comply with that manual, in essence, you're going to be complying with the regulations themselves, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. So that's what we look for. We look for non-compliance related issues in either event, whether we're a defense or plaintiff. We try to, because we're not advocates. We don't come in, you're the advocate, you're the attorney. All right, we come in as non-advocates and we look at a file and we non-biased basis and try to make determinations what happened.
So why is there this niche expert field that you work within when there's already police officers that are going to go out and conduct an investigation? Can you give a little bit of an explanation as to how you fit in? Like, why after a crash are you needed by a family?
Yeah, sure. So first off, a regular everyday trooper that's running the road out there, he's on the beat on an interstate highway. He's not going to be a commercial motor vehicle guy. He's not going to be what's called MCSAP, MCSAP. He's not going to be a MCSAP guy. He's just a standard trooper, if there's any such term, but he doesn't have the requisite knowledge nor training and experience and certification to be considered a commercial motor vehicle CVI, commercial vehicle inspection individual enforcement. So that guy is but a trooper that comes in and he writes a report or does potentially an action reconstruction of what happened, they're not going to be coming in and testifying as far as what we would put together. So we get into our practice. We get into that action reconstruction report because that doesn't tell the whole story. So we look at that. I mean, when they do an action reconstruction report, more times than not, they're not going to have a lot of the details that we will get into. So, for example, through, as you know, the discovery process, we wind up getting a number of documents, and we request a number of documents as well. And those documents on a commercial motor vehicle, the motor carrier, which referred to as motor carrier, the driver of the commercial motor vehicle, we're going to get a set of documents that are going to be sent to the retaining counsel, and retaining counsel then turns it over to us. We look at those and make a determination: what happened, why it happened, how it happened. Should that guy have been driving for that company? Should he be behind the wheel of a tractor trailer? Yeah, okay, he has a CDL, but he's had 3 crashes, within the last 9 months. That's not going to look well for the motor carrier. Then again, at the same time, it may come out when we're looking at what's called a DQ file, driver qualification file. We may look at that DQ file, and when we see that DQ file, the driver's, he's spotless. The guy is, he's done a good job. It just was a bad day. What happened? And there are occasions out there where the 4-wheel motor vehicle is also, at fault as well. So you look at not that we necessarily get into causation, but we get into contributing factors in terms of retention. All right. So driver retention. Should that guy have been behind the wheel in the first place? So if you did no background check on that driver, you have to look at whether he's considered, quote, qualified or unqualified, or disqualified, even worse. Okay, disqualified means he has no CDL. He's been suspended, and that's very problematic for a motor carrier that has him on the road. And I've seen it happen. So we have to compile a whole plethora of documents and information to really break it all down, and then reading depositions and so forth. The driver of a car may say something that's helpful for us to look at. The driver of the commercial motor vehicle may have said something that's helpful for us to look at, or even the corporate rep, which could be a safety director or something to that effect. And we look for all those little things and take all that seemingly impossible amount of information, which could be thousands and thousands of pages of documents and videos, dash cam videos and so forth, and then take it and build a report that generalizes and summations everything that's in that that pilot document discovery. We go through that in detail and make sure that we don't miss anything.
So yeah, that's great. I mean, when I think about it, I think, okay, the cops are out there and they have a job, and that job is to look at a criminal code and decide whether a driver violated a criminal code so that society can bring a case against them to, to try to make sure that the driver is complying with the criminal laws. But what you're talking about, what you're talking about is, I think of it like, let's say that the police are looking at a little circle of information to determine whether, did they knowingly speed? Did they knowingly switch lanes without a blinker? Did they violate somebody's right of way? You're talking about an investigation into not just what happened in that moment that caused the crash, but instead how that moment ever even got to be able to exist, meaning like, should that driver have even been on the road? Should they have been hired? Were they trained? All of those. Sounds to me like your investigation is so much larger in scope. Is that right?
Yeah, for example, I mean, I just recently had one where the driver had been working for, number one, he had an application that was kind of like what you would pick up at a Staples, and they filled that out. You can't use that. You need to have a DOT compliant application, which asks a whole lot more information. So we looked at the DQ files. So this guy, they never did any kind of background check on a driver. They didn't do anything that they were supposed to do. On top of that, he was with the motor carrier that's a trucking company. He was with the motor carrier for 9 years, and not one time did he ever have any training. Now the corporate representative comes in and he sits there and he goes, "We hired him with a CDL, so we didn't have to train him. He was already trained." No, that's not what it says in 390.3 paragraph E2, because when we sit here and we ask him questions, we ask him about the hours of service rule. He didn't know. He had no idea what the hours of service rule. Now, is that the norm? I would say not really, but it can be. It can be a catastrophic decision hiring a driver like that. So we're always encouraging motor carriers is do the best you can to try to make sure that you hire good, solid, safe drivers, because they could be the difference between bankruptcy, worst case scenario of people getting killed, but then bankruptcy and everything else that could follow.
So when the police are out there and they're looking at, what was the specific cause of this event, you're kind of looking at it, starting with, it sounds like, should that driver have ever even been put into the cab of that truck? And if so, what sort of training was provided, and was that adequate? And if so, should they have continued to retain him if he got a series of accidents or tickets, et cetera? Those might be reasons why a reasonable company should get that driver out of the cab of that truck. It sounds like that's the kind of work you're doing.
Yeah, so we look at it, Kyle, we look at it in terms of negligent hiring and negligent retention. All right, that's just an opinion. And that's what we provide as opinions. So if we look at it, and we're going to be looking at the driver in terms of qualification, which is under Part 391 of the FMCSRs, we look at that and make a determination. Is that should that driver had been hired in the first place? And if the answer is no, all right, there's a good chance that he should not have been retained beyond that point of hiring as well. So we take that in its entirety, and we look at we break it down ad nauseum to be able to really see the details of it. And like I said, some files we have, there's 5,000 pages of discovery that we've got to go through. We don't get into things like medical and such, but coroner reports and things like that. But we have to look at all the details. So we use the word qualification whether a driver. Now, there are some motor carriers out there, usually there's a much smaller guys. So a motor carrier could turn around and say, well, he's qualified, like I suggested earlier, he's qualified because he has a CDL. Now, that does not make him qualified, right? Because if he does, and you question him in depth, so attorney counsel comes in and questions that driver in deposition, and he comes in with a blank stare and look in his eyes, and he can't answer. So now, does he have to know this entire book in its entirety? You know, it quite honestly, it's not. It's not really. This is something that I do on a regular basis every day. My colleagues and I would do on a regular basis every day. So we need to know what's in that book and everything. And it comes out. I get a new copy every 4 months as well. So we need to know what's in there. Would there be a reasonable expectation to sit there and say that a professional commercial motor vehicle driver is going to harbor all the knowledge in there? Not really, but you can look at something very critical, which is 383.111 in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, which is the required knowledge section. So if that driver cannot demonstrate the required knowledge to be a driver, then he may very well be considered unqualified to be operating a commercial motor vehicle.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting is if you think about it, the driver gets in behind the cab, but there's a company behind that driver that's put him there or that's allowed him to do work for their company. But if the driver causes the crash, it's the driver that gets the ticket for causing the crash, the driver who suffers the penalties. And in a lot of cases, I know there are cases where the trucking company itself might be held criminally liable, but that's not the norm. The norm is maybe the driver is, but the company sits back there and the safety director of that company is not getting a ticket issued to him. He's not going to jail if he kills somebody. That's not happening. I mean, that's up to the civil case. That's
the civil side. Correct. Right. And that's where we come in on the civil side. We do some criminal work, but not very much. From time to time, we get called in on a criminal case. But, in terms of a driver, if he acted in a negligent manner and caused a crash, it's a different story.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like to put that in a box, right? You got the criminal case over here, and that's what the society punishing somebody for breaking the law. That's the driver who gets the ticket. But the civil law that's the ability of the family of the victims to take matters into their own hands and hold the driver accountable, but also hold that employer accountable who maybe didn't do an appropriate driver application to see if the person should be on the road, didn't provide the training, continue to make money off of the situation, right? That's what we see.
Yeah, I mean, and to go back again to that case that crash just happened, I think it was I-35 and going through Austin. And I'll back up and say, I'll use the term allegedly. He was allegedly intoxicated, but he was arrested for intoxication. That right. I can tell you. So that now comes back, the motor carrier is going to be held to account for that because, not to get wonky, but 390.11 of the FMCSR's Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations state in there that any duty and or prohibition of the driver is likewise that of the motor carrier. So it's kind of like, there's no escape clause. There's no golden parachute to get you out of it. And then once you make a determination of which parts of 383.111 that driver violated to get him into that situation, then we go into section 2.0 of the AAMVA, which is the CDL manual, and then in addition to a bunch of other standards of care, and we build on our file that way.
Okay, Scott. So, I mean, really very interesting stuff. I now get, and I think our audience will understand how you fit in, and that is you're coming in and you're able to take a complete global big picture look at the truck driver, the truck company, right? And the circumstances surrounding it to help families. And I know you do both sides, or help families or companies really understand what were the total circumstances that led to this event even being possible, right?
Well said. I mean, you're looking at there is in 2022, there was 5,936 fatal crashes involving commercial motor vehicles, and that was up 2% from the year prior. So it's not getting better. Hopefully, with the DOT be having some changes. Hopefully things will turn around. But yeah, there's a significant number of crashes. And there's crashes. We're having this conversation right now. There's a multitude of crashes around the country. It's
Well,
just
you think about that number, 5,000 people
yep,
killed. I mean, think about if you put those on airplanes, how many full airplanes would be
yep,
crashing on a daily basis to meet that sort of number? I mean, that's
yep,
just incredible. So, can
yep.
you tell us, one of the reasons that people I think love this podcast is that we're able to take a real look at, man, what are some things that you see out there from a guy like, man, you've investigated over 1,000 incidents involving vehicles. There's got to be some trends that you see. Let's talk about one that I think comes up a lot, and that is fatigue driving or inattentive driving with motor vehicles. Can you tell us about your experience and how fatigue is such a big issue out there?
Yeah, fatigue. Well, fatigue and inattentive driving are kind of go hand in hand. They're the two. They're two of the most significant parts and causes of crashes, both commercial motor vehicles and cars. Inattentive driving. Somebody's, and especially in today's day and age with all the technology, cell phones, and I drive a big F-350, so I'm pretty high up, and I look over, I see people texting all the time in a car. And I've seen drivers. They're on handheld phone like this. That's a violation of the regulations on interstate commerce. You just can't do that. So there's all kinds of things to look at. Drivers have a responsibility of both the regular vehicle as well as a commercial motor vehicle. And when things don't go well, I always tell people, and I used to volunteer my time going into a driver's ed class at a high school, and I would go in there and I would say, listen, I'm going to give you one life-saving piece of information. Stay away from big trucks. And what that means is don't sit here and look at a guy. If you can see him in your rearview mirror and he's a couple car lengths behind you, you're at risk of losing your life, because if something happens, your car gets a blowout or something else happens, and you have very few options how to react. That truck could run you right over, and you're a speed bump. So it's important to make sure that there's a place called a no zone around a commercial motor vehicle. Stay away from the front of it, because the most pernicious crashes happen in the front of the commercial motor vehicle, like coming into a queue of vehicles and so forth, because you got to figure that the impact speeds and so forth and the closing speeds and all these other dynamics that action reconstructionists will compute. And then either left or right side, there's blind spots, commercial motor vehicles. That's why they have so many mirrors. They're trying to mitigate those blind spots. So, and you don't want to drive behind them. I had a case where a drive shaft came off of a tractor trailer off of a truck, the truck tractor itself. And when it came off of the truck tractor, it wound up getting kicked up by the rear wheels of the semi trailer. And I won't get too graphic, but the people in the car didn't survive.
Wow. Man, I'll tell you what, Scott, that's, first of all, as a parent with kids driving, what a great piece of information that I bet you, if you were to take a poll of 16-year-old, 17-year-old, man, even adult drivers, they're not thinking like you're thinking, Scott. They're not thinking about what you just said. And that is stay away to the extent that you can, stay away from being around those trucks. Get away from them. Don't put yourself in a position where you're in front of a 80,000 pound vehicle, where if something goes wrong in front of you, that thing gets the opportunity to run you over. I don't think people are thinking like that, Scott. I don't think they are. I think it's super important.
Look at it this way, Kyle. For a fully loaded 18-wheeler with 80,000 pounds, that's a truck tractor, that's tare weight, that's gross weight, everything all combined, 80,000 pounds. If you do a hard brake application and everything is perfect, your brakes are perfect and perfectly adjusted and everything else, it's going to take you well over a football field to bring. So you have perception and reaction. Perception, it takes you on average, 3/4 of a second to realize, there's a problem. And then the reaction is taking that foot as a truck driver and getting it down onto the brake pedal. And then there's another half a second delayed reaction of what we call air brake lag time. So if you add all that up, that's about 2 seconds. That 2 seconds at 95 feet per second, that driver just drove two-thirds of a football field, or excuse me, one-third of a football field in that short distance, right? Was that? Yeah, correct. Yeah. So at 95 feet per second at 65 miles per hour, that's, yeah,
Yeah,
that
it's
could create
two-thirds
a
of
problem.
a football field's like 300 feet long, right? So
300 feet.
so you're talking about covering almost 200 before there's even an opportunity to do anything in a truck like
Yep.
that.
And then the brakes have to engage on, your brakes have to engage, and hopefully the driver's able to keep it in a straight line and lock it up and, not cause a problem. But if you're that person that's, allowing yourself to be in front of a commercial motor vehicle, and I tell the parents listening to this right now, teach your children. Teach
Yeah,
your children. If you got a truck that's getting up behind you, don't hit your brakes to try to, teach him a lesson. The only lesson that's going to be taught is you become a speed bump. Just get
right.
out of his way. Just get out of his way and let him go.
Wow. I mean, that's crazy. Now, I mean, that's so thank you for saying that. I think you probably will save a couple of lives just by having this conversation today. Now, going back to the fatigue issue, one of the things that I'm aware of just in my line of work is something called a driver's log or
Mhm.
driver's logs. And my understanding is, and that's why I've got you, the expert here, to correct me, tell me what I know and what I don't know. But these drivers, if you're driving interstate in these trucks, you're only allowed to drive. You're supposed to only be back behind that wheel a certain number of hours a day, and you have to keep track of that. Isn't that right?
Yes, it's a lot easier and harder to cheat, and you have false logs and things like that because it's no longer paper logs where a driver takes a ruler and marks it, the line, how long he's been driving for and such. The e-logs, which is an electronic logging device that's actually installed in commercial motor vehicles, is required now. But what happens is that if you take, and a driver is permitted to drive 11 hours in a day, and 11 hours in a shift or a tour, whatever you want to call it. And in that 11 hours, for the first 8 hours, after that first 8 hours, he has to take a half-hour break. And this is all efforts to avoid fatigue. And this all comes from the hours, it's called hours of service, HOS. Hours of service comes originally from the airline industry. So pilots, or actually, I was with a pilot this weekend, we were talking about it, and it originally came from the pilot industry where they were allowed, they still have to comply with the 10-hour rule. And in the trucking universe, they made some not exceptions, but changes, and it's 11-hour rule. And then just about several years back, they went to the half-hour rule after 8 hours. And you can, I don't want to get too confusing, but you could work 14 hours in that 24-hour cycle, and out of that 14 hours, you can only drive 11 hours. And the reason is, again, strictly for purposes of trying to avoid drivers from becoming fatigued while driving, because fatigue it can be. I've had dash cam videos watching drivers literally, and the driver's under the 11-hour rule, so they're not in violation, but the driver is literally driving, doing this, dozing off, and
Um,
it's wow, yeah.
so, Scott? Did you say that now in almost all, or in all trucks that are over the road drivers, they have this equipment that's electronically tracking the operation of that vehicle? Or can you just explain that? 'Cause
Yeah,
fascinating to hear.
yeah. What happens is that once you fire, so you have to do a pre-trip inspection on your truck, and so you start it up, and it's actually when you start it up, it's registering on this e-log, telling you that the e-log that I'm idle, I'm in idle right now. So we can look at the e-logs, excuse me, we can look at the e-logs from a driver and make a determination. Did you really do a pre-trip? Because I can tell you how many times drivers have sat there and said, I did a pre-trip, but we know you didn't do a pre-trip because the violations are so obvious, and there was a multitude of them that were causative to the crash itself. So we look at the e-log and say, and we'll make sure that we advise the attorney in deposition to ask this question. Ask this question: if you had an e-log here that's telling us that you fired up the truck and you just pulled away, how did you possibly do a pre-trip inspection when you have a mechanical failure? How was that possible? It's just not possible. So I think it's less common and more common. It used to be a bigger issue years ago when you had paper logs, but Now the e-logs are are capable of telling us when the driver started the truck up, when he put it in gear and he started driving, and it's telling us the attitude of the engine, it's telling us RPMs through the ECM data, so electronic control module. So we learn all these things through looking at, you know, what the engine was doing, what the e-log is telling us the driver was doing. And if sometimes if you have a dash cam pointing inbound on the driver, that's very telling. It can be helpful to the motor carrier if the driver's paying attention. I've seen cases where the driver just minding his business, doing his job, and there's a camera facing out the windshield, and all of a sudden he gets a car cut right in front of him, you know, and there was no place for him to go. You know, I've seen that happen too. So that's where, like I said, you know, parents teach your children, don't cut off 18-wheelers.
But right now, most of the trucks out there, what I'm hearing from you is that that vehicle itself is recording the activities of that truck.
That's
And
correct.
and is that is it sophisticated enough where if you were, let's say you're a truck company and you have this monitoring occurring on your truck that's out with your driver on the road, if there's a violation of these safety rules, can it send an email or text or notify the company, hey, this guy's been going for 10 hours straight without a break? Can it do that, or is that not? We're not there yet.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can build into the system depending upon the manufacturer. You know, we look at it and we're able to tell if they have systems in there that are going to be. There's some that are just very minimal, but they meet the federal standard, the federal requirements. There's some that are more elaborate. So I'm not going to say, you know, in general, this is the way it is. It's not black or white. So it's kind of a gray area. But there are rules that the e-logs have to be able to provide certain data. For example, and the 4 duty statuses have to be able to be recorded on that e-log. And the duty statuses are driving, right? So when the truck is actually in motion, in commerce, rolling down the interstate highway. You have sleeper berth. That's when the truck driver's sitting at a truck stop and he's sleeping 10 hours to get his rest break, or 8 hours, whatever, but taking 10 hours off. And so then you have on duty, not driving, and then you have off duty. So on duty, not driving is when the driver he's on duty because he's fueling his truck up at the truck stop. So he's still on duty, but he's not driving at that point.
But if all of this information's available, let's say after a crash to law enforcement, what was going on with this driver, whether they were inside or outside of the rules that are required by the federal law. How come I see situations where cops who are investigating these crashes don't even seem to look at that data and will just make some entry? Driver didn't appear fatigued, or driver didn't appear whatever, but they're not looking. They're not looking at this. Why would that be, Scott?
Well, see, the thing is that if it's non-fatal crash, which, you know, there's more crashes out there that are non-fatal than there are fatal. So meaning fatalities, of course. So if it's a non-fatal crash, you're not going to have normally speaking, you're not going to have a MCSAP, MCSAP, CVI, commercial vehicle inspector, coming out there to inspect the paperwork and so forth. You're just going to have a standard trooper that's out there investigating the crash. So he's looking at state law violations. So driving too fast or whatever, you know, speed or whatever the case may be. So he's just looking specifically at those issues there. He's not looking at the federal motor carrier safety regulations, because a standard trooper or a standard officer that's not a MCSAP CVI guy, he can't write violations under those regulations. He can't unless he's trained and certified like myself.
Wow. So they just ignore this whole body of law because there's not enough of the specially trained cops to go to non-fatality crashes, even serious injury crashes.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say, I don't know if I would frame it in, you know, ignoring it. But I would say that there's a limited number of federally trained through MCSAP officers that are out there that are certified CVI guys, where they can go out and inspect these. Not all troopers are involved with that. It would be cost prohibitive because it's funded by the federal government. So they're just not cost prohibitive, but they're not going to take every trooper and make every trooper in the country a CVI guy.
But just so I'm understanding, Scott, even if the cops didn't do that, this data, if it's preserved, that's information that after a crash you can still go look at, right? For
That's
a
exactly,
family, for a company, you can still get the answers as to whether those violations exist or not, right?
that's exactly what we do, because we know that, and more often than not, unless it's a fatal crash. So if there's just a couple injuries or something to that effect, we know that it's not going to be a in-depth analysis done by some state trooper who's not trained in that. He's just going to come out there from a state perspective and write violations where that are relative to the state violations, not the FMCSA, because they can't.
Yeah,
FM,
but
by the way,
I,
FMCSA is Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, where I don't want to confuse. I'm saying FMCSR and FMCSA. One is administration, one is regulations.
but listen, I think most people, most people think when they're driving out there that if there's a wreck involving a semi truck and somebody's seriously injured, that there's going to be a complete analysis done by law enforcement as to whether this person should have been on the road and whether they violated federal law, not just some state speeding statute. I think people are going to be surprised to hear that there are so many crashes that don't have the kind of analysis that companies like you can provide after the fact in the civil case.
Yeah, I mean, the Fed regs they're pretty exhaustive, and to have that every trooper on the road, out there being a Fed reg guy. I mean, you got to get into 10th Amendment issues and everything else involved here. So it's just it's a whole new rabbit hole you're going to climb into.
Yeah. I tell you, the other thing that I've seen, even in fatality cases, is there is a requirement in a fatality case to go get, under federal law, to go get drug and alcohol tested. But I got to tell you, I see fatality cases here in Colorado. Okay, that's where I am. Here in Colorado, where you'll have a police officer, especially if it's a local police officer, just say, write down, yeah, did not appear intoxicated, and they don't send them off, and the company doesn't send them off, and nobody's getting that even that drug or alcohol test. Do you see that in your work?
I have seen it. I mean, I'm literally handling thousands of cases. Yeah, I have seen it. I would say that it's usually you find that with the smaller motor carriers, because I've even seen cases where in deposition a motor carrier, a trucking company, even though that they're not 3,000 or 20,000 commercial motor vehicles on the road, they think that because they only have one truck and it's a moving van, for example, it meets the definition on a 390.5 of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulation to be considered a commercial motor vehicle. So I've had where the corporate representative comes in and sits there and says, "Yeah, well, we're not a trucking company." Well, you are a trucking company by
Wow.
definition. You are, So they don't realize, if you don't realize you're a trucking company, you don't even know that you have to comply with this. I've seen that happen on a number of cases over the years.
Well, what's amazing is that um, that that these huge vehicles can be out there on the road, and like you said, some companies don't even recognize that they're required to comply with these regulations. And if they get in a crash, depending upon how serious it is and which law enforcement appears on the scene, there may not even be any real accountability under those federal laws, depending upon the circumstances. In my book, Unthinkable, I talk about a little bit of the police officer lottery, right? You don't know, depends on where your crash happens, what the community is from a law enforcement perspective there, who's not on vacation, whose shift it is, that's whether they send somebody out, the level that of information you get from law enforcement could be great, it could be very insufficient.
Yeah, some states have great reputations for really doing, very good post-crash reports. And we know those states. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus or, anything like that. And then we know the states and the cities that are just absolutely horrible. And so that increased the amount of work that we have to do to try to figure out, some of the nuances and details. So, and how we get some of those things is, for example, well, like I said earlier, the e-logs or the ECM, which is the electronic control module off of the truck tractor that tells us what the truck was doing brake applications, turn signals. It tells us everything. It's the brain of the truck. So we want that information to be able to make a determination. Did that person decelerate? Did they have their what's called a jake brake? Did they have that on during that rainy event? Because you're not supposed to, because it causes a truck to break traction. So there's just, and that's something in Colorado. That could be an issue for sure up in the mountains.
Well, I tell you, I mean, it's just great that you have companies like yours and experts like you that families and companies both can turn to get those real answers. Now we're running out of time almost, but before we go, I do want to ask you. I try to provide our audience with some informative, information from our experts and how things can be done more safely. So, this sort of, can you give us just some information on selecting a safe motor carrier, like to do business with if you're out there doing business, and how do you identify as a regular citizen which vehicles are being handled safely and which ones aren't?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I personally myself, I do this. I'll wait until I pull off the road or something. I don't do it while I'm driving. But if I see a truck driver operating erratically, I mean, I see it from time to time, and I'm just compelled to do this. So I'll write down a DOT number and the time, location, where I was, what milepost, and the truck tractor number or license plate, whatever I can get. And then I'll get myself to a rest area or an exit, and I'll jump online. And I know the system. We go to the system that we can pull down Safer System. We can plug in that DOT number that's on the door, on the side of the door, and then in there it will give me the phone number, the name of the motor carrier, et cetera, et cetera. I will call that motor carrier up and I'll say, "This is who I am. All right. If you're at a computer, look me up." And I've stood shoulder to shoulder in enforcement issues on commercial motor vehicles. I've driven commercial motor vehicles. I mean, there's very little I have done in terms of commercial motor vehicles. I haven't built any. That's about it. So, I'll call the motor carrier up and I'll say, "Who is your safety director?" They'll say, "Okay, Bob Smith." Bob, Scott Turner. My name, my company, what I do, my background. And I'll say, "You have a truck number 123. This guy is going to kill somebody. I'm telling you right now, I've seen it before and it's going to happen." So if you look at the large truck crash causation study, and I suggest you do, this guy is going to kill somebody. Mark my words on this. And if it happens and I find out about it, I'll make sure that I bring forward the fact that I called you and warned you. So,
wow.
yeah,
So first of all, just some lingo. You talked about the DOT number. Every tractor that's pulling a trailer that's engaged in interstate driving is supposed to have some numbers right on the door, right? Is that right?
yeah,
Right around the door.
it's either on the door or it's on the rocker panel just below the door. So it's a US DOT number, and it will say US DOT, and then it'll say a series of numbers, and that number can tell you everything you need to know about that motor carrier.
If you have that
if you know where to
number,
look. If you know where to look.
if you have that number, you can identify who is responsible for that truck being on the road. Is that right?
Yes, that's the motor carrier. It won't tell you it won't tell you who the driver is. It will tell you who the motor carrier is, and it will give you their address, where they're from, and there's actually more statistics in there that we incorporate at a later point. For example, the out of service ratio. It will tell us out of service. So I'll look at it and I'll sit there and go, "Well, this motor carrier," and I'll literally sit on a exit ramp someplace where I'm protected from traffic, and I'm pulling this up and I'm looking. I'm going, before I call, because I want to have a little knowledge on this guy and this motor carrier before I call him up. And I'll look at that and I'll say, this guy, the motor carrier itself, all right, they got 300 trucks. They have a 80% out of service ratio. That means 8 out of every 10 times they get pulled into a scale house or get pulled over by a mix-app trooper, they're getting taken out of service for violations. Now, if you have that, that's problematic. That means that what out of service means is that it's an enforcement agency that will come in, a mix-app enforcement agency, will say, this driver or this truck tractor or semi-trailer is in too dangerous of a condition to continue in commerce, and they red flag it out of service.
So if you're driving down the road, let's say you're with a group of people and you see a truck that's driving improperly, of course you want to stay away from it, but if you get the opportunity, maybe one of your passengers could take a photo with their phone, like could get that DOT number, and then the next reasonable opportunity that you have, take that DOT number. Is there a DOT website? Is it just a Department of Transportation website, or is it more difficult than
Yeah.
that?
No. All you need to do is Google the word SAFER, SAFER, SYS, short for system, SAFER SYS. And then something will come up and it will say, enter the DOT value, and then you plug that in, and boom, up comes the motor carrier. It tells you everything you need to know. And
Then
then,
you'll
and
have the
then,
name and the telephone number, and then you make a telephone call and
yeah,
report what you're seeing.
yeah. Because the way I look at it, if somebody's going to take that effort, and I'm a motor carrier, somebody's actually taking that effort. You have to, as a motor carrier, you have to make a determination. Is this just a, angry driver because he was following the guy and he was in a lane and he wouldn't move over, something like that. So as a motor carrier, you have to make a determination. So I know when I make that phone call, I'm usually seeing that there's going to be results, because I tell them my background first and say, go and look at my website. If you look at my website, that's going to give you all the information you need to know about us.
Yeah. Well, that's incredibly helpful information, and I think we can all do our part, right? If you see something,
Yeah.
You'll see these signs on the trucks that say, "How am I doing?" Drive. I don't know how many people call those, but I think it's important to the safety of everybody around, because we're all out there, and we all have this expectation that we're going to make it to our destination safely, but we're dependent 100% on everybody else who's around us to actually make it there safely, and so.
Yeah.
We can all be accountable.
And and to your point, Kyle, like you said earlier, and you're absolutely right, and I had mentioned as well. You're driving a car. Don't take your phone and start taking pictures of, because now you're driving inattentively,
That's
right?
right.
Don't be taking pictures with your phone. I'll tell my wife, say, take that number down, that DOT number. She knows exactly what to do, because
Yeah.
sometimes we drive up north for some time, because we're down here in Florida, and it's just we'll see a truck driver driving erratically, and I'll pull over, and once I got my wife wrote that number down, and I'll get on the phone with the motor carrier, and I read them the riot act in a nice way to
Yeah.
get their attention.
Well, Scott, we're at the end of our time here, man. It's been so informational. Let me just make sure that everybody knows again who you are and how to find you. And this is, again, Scott Turner is the founder of Truck Accident and Incident Experts, LLC. They have a website, truckingexpertwitness.com, I believe is it. Is that right?
That's correct.
Truckingwitnessexpert.com.
Trucking expert witness, yeah.
Truckingexpertwitness.com. Is that right?
That's correct. And by the way, Kyle, so it's really important. We don't work for individuals. We only work for insurance carriers and attorneys. So, if somebody calls up and we need to talk to you about it. If you're not an attorney, you're not an insurance carrier, we don't get involved.
I understand completely, and that's really important to share. I thank you for that. But look, Scott, the fact is, there's a lot of people who are working with lawyers, and those lawyers may not even know, depending on their level of experience, right? Not everybody is an expert in this field as a lawyer or as an insurance company. So people need to know how to get their insurance company or their expert, their own lawyer, to reach out and find you. So appreciate so much, man. I appreciate so much what an incredible amount of information that you provided today. I can't thank you enough for coming. I think it's a tremendous service to everybody in the community to hear. And just, man, talk about the price of admission. Just knowing as a parent to go back and reiterate to your kids, stay away from trucks, and there's good reasons why. And there's easy ways to accomplish it. So thank you very much, Scott, for being with us. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Y'all be safe out in those highways.
All right. Thank you.
You've been tuning into the
All right, guys.
Unthinkable podcast with your host, Kyle Bachus. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, kylebachus.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.